welcome to another exciting, thrilling episode of Never Seen It Film Club with me, one of your hosts, Emma Bainbridge, one of your other hosts, Robert J. Simpson from Cinepoint. And welcome to Never Seen It Film Club, the film club where we watch films that you've never seen. Hi.
Hello.
We're both a little under the weather today.
The plane.
No.
Yes.
So this might be an interesting audio experience for those of you listening to the podcast. There might be a lot of sniffles, coughs, and or more
Hacking up a lung, basically.
Wow.
That was me about 2 weeks ago, was hacking up a lung. I don't seem to have completely shifted it, but I'm definitely not at
full
bob. I am not at full bob. I'm kind of like, at the moment, maybe about 60%.
You're in a buh.
A boo.
A boo. I mean, it's doing interesting gravelly things to you, but you sound like one of those like kind of 1940s like detectives who smokes a lot at the moment.
I was doing a play thing last week, and I had a scene where I got very loud towards the end of the end of the show for Halloween. And after I did it the first time, it did something to my voice, and for the rest of the day, it was all dropped down considerably. I thought, I kind of like this, but yes. But you don't sound too bad, I mean, considering.
Yeah, all things considered, I sound a lot better than I did yesterday. It was one of those things where the guys were like, do you really want to go ahead with the show? And like a true professional, I was like, yeah, all right, I'm going to do it, otherwise I just won't do it. Because I'm a true professional. But no, yesterday I sounded a bit more like this.
Oh, you'd have cancelled if that was the way today.
Well, we would never cancel on you twice in 1 month because somebody messed up their calendar. It's me. Hi. I'm the problem, it's me. Never do that. That would never happen. Today we are discussing our movie of the month, which was on this list for no reason whatsoever, because it's a great film, but it's John Waters' 1988 hit Hairspray.
Baltimore, 1962.
You're looking good, a bit
The heyday of hairdos and hair don'ts.
We shall overcome someday.
Not with that hair, you won't.
Heartthrobs and hefty girls.
Mama, welcome to the 60s.
Hot dates and hip talkers.
No matter what you've heard, we are gonna teach the white children how to do the bird. Flap your wings, flap your wings.
Beat mix and hair hoppers.
I can't see through her hair.
So, Hairspray. I always do this, but I'm like, what do you think of Hairspray, Robert?
What do you think? What do you think? What do you think?
Well, as you've already said, it does not deserve any place on our best of the worst list because there's nothing bad about the film at all. I mean, it feels like it's an overhang from last season's films that became musicals.
Yep.
But this was a film that was moderately popular on release, has gained a cult following after, and has managed to launch a successful musical adaptation. It's not a bad film. It
shouldn't be on this list. I don't know
No.
why you voted for it. I really don't know. I don't know how it made it on that list.
Well, I mean, that's maybe the problem. It shouldn't have been on the list in the first place, let alone giving people the chance to vote for something that was actually quite good.
100%.
I've seen it before, not for a while. So I have seen it, and I have seen the 2007 musical version of it as well, which I rewatched after watching the 1988 version again. And I really like it. I mean, I'm already quite a fan of sort of 50s and 60s pop culture and the music. So there's a lot in the film that appeals. It does feel... I can't help but draw comparisons between it and the musical adaptation because it feels a little bit rougher. It feels a little bit more pointed. It feels a little bit more like it has a message and a bit more realistic. Obviously, it's not a musical as such, so it feels a bit more like it probably the culture would have done at the time in Baltimore in 1962. But it's a really good, solid film, and I really have nothing... I don't think at this point I have anything bad to say about it, but tease me.
Yeah, I think we just go home. Thanks for joining us today, guys. We'll see you next time on Never Seen a Film Club. Yeah, I'm slightly insulted that it was voted for, to be honest. I think it may be out of any of the John Waters films that could have been on this list is the one that's least deserving. Because I love this film. It's great. It's one of those rare moments in history where you have a film that's both enjoyable and has a very strong political message that does not feel preachy. It's very funny. The styling in it's quite wonderful. It's high camp. And yeah, it's like a semi-autobiographical look into John Waters' youth and like that 1960s Baltimore, because it's one of those weird things where the 60s in Baltimore bred two great pop culture hitmakers in John Waters and then Howard Ashram, who famously Little Shop of Horrors, Little Mermaid, any Disney movie in the 90s, like late 80s, early 90s, you have Howard to ask for that. And they grew up in the same kind of small, tiny little town that was kind of, and again, unique in the 60s. I was reading a little bit about where this kind of Dick Clark kind of show came from. And uniquely, Baltimore didn't have the regional version of a dance show. It had its local version, which Hairspray is based on. Yeah,
there was a massive kind of competition, even though they were ultimately owned by the same network. Baltimore had been there before American Bandstand. It was the Buddy Dean show.
Yes, that's
which
it.
Ran 1957 to 64, from what I recall, and had been incredibly popular. I mean, the whole methodology about the film, the kind of the committee that gets formed of the youngsters who appear, who skip out of school every day to go and dance 6 days a week.
Mikey,
Vicky, Becky,
Vic, Jesse,
Darla,
Holly,
Noreen, Doreen.
and I'm Link.
Potentially for up to 3 hours on the show, live to various pop tracks. They were doing that, and where it sort of deviates from where the Hairspray deviates from what actually happened is in how the outcome of the integration.
Yes, 100%.
Although the integration issue was a thing.
Yeah, Hairspray's surprisingly is the fairy tale ending of how things ended. But what I like about it is that the Buddy show was like, John Waters describes it as like the girl's hair was higher, the boys' pants were tighter, and it was the hooligan version of American Bandstand, because that's what Baltimore was like. It was a little grimier, it was a little grittier than like typical middle America. It had that kind of what we would now probably think of as like trashy Americana kind of vibes, you know, like ladies with 3 foot high ratted hair, smoking cigarettes, in tight like spandexy tight pants. Like, I just want to go there for half an hour. I would hate to live there. That's why I'm saying, you know, people who are like, if I could time travel to anywhere, it would be 1952. I'm like, no, it was a terrible time for women and people of color and being queer in general in those times. I would have been awful. Aesthetically, though, half an hour hanging out with like Dolly Parton in the 60s in Baltimore, eating a crab salad, perfect.
I mean, I guess part of the problem is this is sort of John Waters' version of what that would have been like, because of the way of television archiving. The stuff went out live. There's very little of the Buddy Dean show actually survives in the archives at all, because it was live broadcast. They didn't tend to record it. The tapes that they did use got wiped.
Yeah, no danger of that happening with Never Seen It Film Club.
No, it's all stored up on multiple hard drives. So because of that, it's, you know, I'm very aware in terms of dealing with any kind of period television, there's possibly a tendency to kind of misremember and to idealize and fantasize a little bit about it. I spent this afternoon reading through extensive interviews with some of the people who had actually been on the committee of the Buddy Dean show as well. And I mean, they painted an interesting picture, and it does sound very like the Hairspray model. Absolutely, but I don't know if it was quite as gritty and as it sounds to be. I mean, American Bandstand and the Buddy Dean show, the kind of the competition is a weird one. It's a professional jealousy between Dick Clark and Buddy Dean himself. Buddy Dean had been a DJ for a lot longer. He'd had a lot more experience, you know, and I think that was part of the issue. So they had a rule where if you'd been on American Bandstand, you couldn't do the Buddy Dean show. But if you had been on Buddy Dean, you were allowed to do American Bandstand. So there was a kind of snobbery within that, and I find that fascinating. For a whole culture that is kind of alien to us, I guess, in the UK at that point. Bearing in mind, this is largely, I imagine, we largely go out to a UK audience. You've got the likes of Ready, Steady, Go. Top of the Pops isn't even quite in at that point. Top of the Pops isn't until, 62, 63? Somewhere around that, 64 maybe.
Yeah, I remember Top of the Pops being relatively late in the kind of...
But they're all kind of similar things where you've got records that are being played, artists will come in, they'll mime over them, and then you've got your teenagers dancing around. And Top of the Pops is a pretty good example. We're all, I think, very familiar with some version of it here in the UK, and it's better preserved in the archives as well, so we can see how it was. But I think maybe Ready, Steady, Go would have been the UK equivalent at the time, which is probably a show you've never seen.
No, I've never seen it. There we go. It also kind of reminds me a little bit of like Strictly Come Dancing. Different vibe, but similar idea of like local people come have a good time while mild celebrity DJs in the background.
Well, it's also the culture around the dance, the dances that they were learning every week, that they were performing endlessly, that, the youngsters were then picking up on and learning to dance themselves. It was a pop cultural kind of education for folks. And I guess that, again, is like, I don't know if anyone sits at home and watches Strictly every week and then goes out and tries to learn how to tango.
It's what I do every weekend.
But I imagine there's something like that. But I think we're deviating slightly, but I think what's fascinating about reading about how that show worked on television was the soap opera elements of it. How the kids kind of became stars and people fell for their played out relationships and interactions. And there's an element of that, I think, that you see in Hairspray, where we're looking at Link and what's her name?
Amber?
Link and Amber's relationship. We're kind of following them. We're kind of, people are getting G'd up to it, then they're falling out of love with it. And then when Tracy does really well, the merchandising opportunity that offers, and the love for that. I mean, that's classic soap opera.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant that this is sort of, that this show was kind of a precursor to, I don't know, Big Brother?
I was going to say, it's like those, like, it's almost like The Only Way is Essex, except you don't see them go out for drinks, you see them dancing on the TV show, but the emotional investment's the same, where you're like, oh, I hope, because, spoiler alert, they're story producers on reality television. I know, guys, I know, I didn't want to be the one that had to tell you all this, but there are. Like, the shock, the horror, the awe that, your favourite people are strategically placed into dynamical relationships on your favorite reality TV show, but it happens, and it's like this is kind of the precursor to all that kind of action where you're like, right, who's popular this week? Okay, because in John Waters' Hairspray, the character of Fender is actually more important than he is in the musical. He gets one line in the musical, great stuff, but he is kind of like the kind of rival to Link. And he's immediately Tracy, like, him our thing, and then she decides, oh no, I'm here, fuck it, I've had a crush on Link Larkin for like 1,000 years, I'm gonna go for it. And then you've got like the jealous like boyfriend rivalry, and then all this kind of stuff happening, and you're like, ooh, and you can see it play out, which is kind of funny. And just to think that, like, this is genuinely, like, you have like massive TV producers, guys in their 50s and 60s going to these teenagers being like, right, today you're going to dance with him, not with him. And you're going to dance with her and not with her. And you're going to give like a ring to her or a rose or something because we got to sell it, kid. And you're just like, what the hell? This is like, what is life? And then life is a performance, and it's like that in real life anyway. But yeah, it's just to me, Hairspray is like the kind of, it's like a sanitized, unsanitary version. I think it's the classic nostalgia thing of, if you look at your own childhood, even when you try and make it realistic, it's like, where's the fun in that? Like, add the camp factor, like, turn it up to 11, like, because there's one of the things, I was watching an interview John Waters did with Ricki Lake, about, because it's the 35-year anniversary of Hairspray, in case you didn't know, because it's 1988. Where he was like, there was no big girls on the television. He was like, even in its heyday, he was like, you never get a big girl be on that show. It would never happen. And the reason that he went with that narrative was because he was like, a big girl can be is automatically an outsider, and anyone can identify with an outsider if they're likable and they're existing in this world just as themselves, which is exactly what Tracy is. She is unashamedly herself. And it's like, it's one of those things that as an outsider, or someone who considers themselves an outsider, or the weirdos and the freaks out there, the punky girls with the green hair, you want to be that, though. You want to be so unashamedly yourself that you don't care what other people think, but that's not reality. Because like, it's all well and good having a big, loud, bravado-y personality to yourself, but I'm just like, 16-year-olds should not be forced to dance in front of each other and pick who's on the council of a TV show that's going to get themselves. It gave me the ick so fast to be like, I've never been that much myself, and here's Tracy Turnblad, this 15 to 16-year-old from Baltimore, Maryland, with a dad who owns a joke shop randomly, and like her mother's a laundress, and she just does not care, and she goes for it, and she makes out with the hot guy and has a political message and ends segregation all by herself.
Is that stretching your disbelief a little bit too much?
Input. But yeah, so I think that's the nice thing about it. And again, like as you mentioned, like this is probably John Waters' 5th or 6th like mainstream film, but his first PG rating. And like, when I say mainstream, I don't think even prior to Hairspray you could consider him mainstream. He was more of a, like the trash movies and the midnight screenings. He was popular, but not mainstream. And then I think Hairspray was the first time that a narrative film that wasn't overly artistic and out there, and had more of a narrative. Because if you actually look at, like, especially like the trash trilogy, like Pink Flamingos and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, the plots in those are paper thin, but it's the characterization that make it great. But with Hairspray, there seems to be a message and a narrative that work really well. And it's like, I think it is a turning point in his career to be like, to let him, because 2 years later Crybaby came out, had a similar kind of rise. It was like mediocrely accepted in the box office, but it was with home video. And then same thing, it's now a Broadway musical and doing really well. And then if you watch his career trajectory since Hairspray, it gets it's not sanitized, it's just maybe polished.
Well, I think he's certainly a more accepted figure than he would have been in the early 80s. This is certainly probably his most commercial work. It's the only one of his films to have a PG rating, I believe. So it is incredibly accessible. And I suppose in a way that in itself that feels like reflective of the message of the film. Because if you're talking about the outsider, I mean, for all Tracy's attempts to be accepted, to become one of the kind of the popular dancers, there is still resistance. I mean, some of the dancers don't want her. Some of the society doesn't want her. Her school doesn't understand her. She still ends up being ostracized and put aside with the black kids, basically, with anyone of color, and Tracy just for having, not just for having big hair, but I think for not quite fitting in. So there's a kind of punishment there, but ultimately she becomes, she's the accessible character, and this film is the accessible work for somebody who doesn't quite fit in, whose work isn't mainstream. And there is something about the film that remains kind of sort of, I want to use the word uncanny. There's something about it that just feels slightly off. And I guess that's probably personified through Divine. Because, you watch this film. I mean, I don't know if this has been up for a reappraisal in recent years in terms of sort of trans issues, but you've got Divine playing a dual role, the angry TV boss, and sort of racist misogynist, but also Tracy's mother, And for those of you who maybe are not aware, Divine was a male, an out gay male performer who used the Divine persona for their professional work.
It's the times. They're a-changing. Something's blowing in the wind.
Who, as John Waters says, was often misidentified as a trans person, wasn't themselves trans, wore the women's clothes for work, and that was it. But does it rather convincingly. I mean, I have no problem accepting Divine as mother, as a, and like there's a part of me that started watching that and being so conscious of kind of the conversations that have been going on recently about trans and what that means and how we perceive that, and then kind of trying to get my head around that within this thing. And then I realized that, I've just got to suspend my day. Would have felt that was either a part that should be played by somebody who was born female gender or a trans woman.
Mm-hmm. I think what saves that from being overly problematic, because again, you're quite right. If that happened today, there'd probably be a whole lot of conversation about it. But it's the sincerity in which Divine plays that role. And as you said, I have zero issue believing that is a woman who has a husband and a child, who cares for it. Like, there's no kind of mock. Even I think this is the problem that some people have with drag, is that they think it is a mockery of womanhood, which, depending on how you identify, we're not gonna. This is that kind of forms.
Depending on the performer, perhaps.
I'm gonna put that over there, but it's this vision that all drag and anyone who acts as a woman is making fun and mocking womanhood and being female and all that kind of stuff. Divine, especially in John Waters' films, was never mocking the female identity and making fun of these women that he was portraying. He was those women sincerely and played it like from a place of, I won't say admiration, but like from a place of reality of being like, well, if I was this woman, this is how I feel about it. And it's just, there's a sweetness to his turn as Edna that, to be fair to John Travolta, I will also say that I felt in the 2007 musical version, where you're like, do you know what? This is very sweet. I have no problem believing it, but gender's a construct, my guys. I mean, that's where I stand on it. And again, I have no problem with people playing with gender in movies, and I have no problem with suspending my disbelief in movies. So that's where I'm like, I don't see an issue with it, but I could see where other people might feel uncomfortable. But that begs the question, why are you uncomfortable? And turfs out and all that.
I mean, it feels kind of rather apt as well for the period, because, this is a period within film, within television, where you do have men donning women's clothes for parts. Sometimes very believably, sometimes not. But it feels like that belongs in a way within the setting of the film. But it's to say it's something that kind of it's a thought that goes through your head. I think watching it with 2023 eyes. Yeah. And then you just have to go, sod it. I'm just either in on this film or I'm not. Yeah. And I think that for me, I just have to be in on it. I mean, there are other more potentially problematic things about the film than Divine. Yeah. The language and the attitude. I mean, the attitude around people of color within the film, within the society that the film depicts, is, I guess, from a nice, safe Western white person living in a predominantly white country, feels kind of, it's very easy to get shocked by this.
A straight white man. I state my problems, other people roll their eyes. 3 trips to the mall, 0 khakis in my slide. I've never been the victim of a random search for drugs. But you can't say my life is easy until you've walked a mile in my Uggs.
But there's also the reality that that is how it went. Negro Day sounds like such a loaded and bad term in itself. I don't think they need to say anything else because that in itself feels like you're othering them in a pejorative way, which they were. But that was also the language of the period. I mean, the joy about this is that, you know, there's this push to have the racial integration, to have the white and the black kids dancing together and not worry about it. But as we kind of talked about earlier on with the Buddy Dean TV show that this is inspired by, when it came to integration, yes, they had every other Friday was their Black Performer Day, and then when the push came and for integration, rather than allow it to happen, the network shut the show down. So, like, that's the society that the people are living in, the kind of the tension that exists. And that's odd. I mean, I find that odd, but I also am very aware that there's a lot of folk out there who will find no issue with that whatsoever, and even today would still support those attitudes.
I think that's the thing for me, like, watching it is like from such a privileged place of never having to experience that. It's so ridiculous to me that was ever a thing. Like the question about, you know, would you ever swim in an integrated swimming pool? And you're like, why's up? But that's the reality of the 60s. And like, this is, again, I think it was like, would be more like our grandparents and parents' generation. Like, it's really easy to forget. It wasn't that long ago. So it's both. I think it's a good thing that, you know, we can watch this and be horrified and enjoy it. It's like, haha, this is so ridiculous. But equally, that reality, especially in America now, in the political climate we're in, that's not that far away for some folks, that you could easily probably get that, like, integration voted back in definitely some states.
Yeah.
With ease. And it's just like, that is baffling. As, like, again, as a millennial who's, you know, relatively safe, broad, like, this is one thing about when you live in a country that has very few minorities seemingly around, you don't have to address these questions within your own society. But I just can't think what it must be like to watch this as a person of color and be like, people genuinely thought that touching someone, or not even touching the person themselves, like the water fountain thing always gets me, where I'm like, you have to have separate water fountains. I'm like, how the fuck are you using a water fountain if you think you're going to get cooties off a water fountain, first of all? But then these are the same people that in their own homes have maids, like women of color, raising their children and like changing their babies and all this kind of shit, and don't see the hypocrisy in that attitude. It's baffling.
I mean, it's hard not to draw a parallel, bearing in mind that this is made in 1988, between the segregation that's there between the races in the 60s that is being depicted, and the issues around gay people and the AIDS epidemic of the 80s. Yeah. I mean, it feels like there's whether it was intended or not, it's hard not to draw some kind of parallel between the two.
100%.
A lot of those kind of phobias were manifested all over again. People were scared to use public drinking fountains for fear of catching stuff. There were attempts in certain areas to not mix people. Within schools, I mean, there still are issues around, you know, who you allow to teach your children and what you allow them to teach. It is, I suppose what's fascinating and horrifying in equal measure for me is just how society keeps on repeating itself, and we just look for the new thing to be scared of. And yet I think somehow those old fears remain and persist and come back again. I mean, you look at, I mean, right now, as we're recording this, between the Islamophobia and the kind of the Palestine-Israel issues. I can't say Palestine or Israel in this without getting us blocked by Spotify. But I mean, you know, a lot of that kind of same rhetoric is being repeated again and again and again. We just change who the villain is.
Yeah, we literally changed. It's like same thing, different font. Like if you look back throughout history, it's like, how do we think? I went on this rant the other day, but I'm like, how do we as a society think we're evolved? I'm like, we haven't. Because if you go back to the ancient Romans, I'm like, they thought the same thing about the Greeks.
Yeah.
They thought they were superior to them. They took over the whole fucking world. They went to the French and were like, "Ha, we're better than you." And it's the same shit, different day. The only thing that changes is the scenery. You could easily make this film today, change the narrative to a refugee situation, and you're like, we're still thinking. There's still people who think that way today, and it's.
I mean, this is why ultimately, of course, it sounds a bit more. I feel a bit more a bit more preachy, a bit more analytical, maybe than sometimes. But I think this is why film and art is so important, because it allows us to reflect those kind of cultural things and to use the stories as a veil for revealing truth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you've got good, engaging characters, you know, if you've got the use of humor and music that John Water does to kind of keep us on board and gee us along, it allows you to plant other stuff in there that actually is important, but also to give us something that means that, you know, 25 years later, 35 years later, we're able to sit down and kind of go, well, what's this actually about? What's this telling us? Rather than maybe in 1988, if we'd sat down and watched it, we'd just gone, ha, great.
Yeah. Weren't our parents funny? Like, because it would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Ha! Like, for us, it's 2003. It's us being like laughing at emo kids. That's the equivalent.
Hey, what's up? I'm Raven, your acid bath princess of the darkness.
And I'm Tara.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. I will always have a soft spot for this film. I think it's almost un-John Waters like for me. It's like John Waters' Diet Coke. It's like John Waters liked. It's like he went, yeah.
I mean,
did it.
There's a few things that are kind of, you know, strike me as being, I think they give us more punch. I mean, one of those is the sort of supremely religious mother of Penelope, who stalks her daughter into Blacktown.
Forgot about
and then locks her up.
She's great.
I mean, that's a far more. I mean, again, it feels like a very identifiable character, but it's a far more potent piece, I think, than. I mean, that's a part that's essentially lost from the musical version, but that strikes me as very strong. There's also the juvenile delinquency element,
yes,
which again is lost from the musical adaptations, where Tracy is sort of not just put into detention, but ultimately gets sent to prison.
Yeah,
off the borstal for being a bad one.
Getting her hair ironed.
Yeah, and that's quite. I don't know. I guess that feels quite significant that there is that. The underbelly is cranked up a bit more.
Yeah.
And it feels grittier, and for me it feels more real as a result. Although the whole her getting sent to borstal, I kind of lose. That loses me a bit because narratively there's a bit of a misflow, but you know it is what it is.
I think my favorite / least favorite part of that is that they don't go to the governor's house to end segregation on television, which is what they've all been fighting for this entire time. No, they go to free Tracy Turnblad from like a very minor stay, probably like 2 weeks.
It is much easier to free a white person than it would be to integrate a black community. I think but she in turn is able to facilitate.
Yeah.
So it's about using the white privilege and white power, I guess, in a way to do something good. It's more, you know, the governor will get lambasted for it, but they know that Tracy is going to be able to facilitate all the things that they want.
In Tracy, we trust. It is just. I just. Why is it on this list? Why did you guys vote for it?
Why did you put it? Why did you put it on the list?
It was not me who put it on the list.
In no way is this a bad film. It does not deserve to be on the list. It's clearly a misnomer. But if us doing this and chatting about it and sticking it on allows you to go and watch it, then I suppose it's done a service. But it's not a bad film.
I think out of any of the films in this season, this is the one that deserves to be on the list, the very, very least. And it's kind of a sleeper hit. Maybe that's why someone put it on the list to be an optional palate cleanser for all the other trash we've had to watch this season, because it's not a coincidence it was sandwiched between The Room and Showgirls either. I was like, if we have to watch either of those, we need something in the middle to cheer us up. If we had to watch those back to back, this would be a dark episode, I think.
I'll tell you after I've seen Showgirls.
Oh, you're not ready for it. No one's ready for Showgirls. I wasn't ready the first time I saw Showgirls, and I don't think you guys will be either. But yeah, ultimately, I think we're just agreeing that Hairspray should never have been on this list. It's easy to talk about all the political messaging in it. It's easy to gush about how great it looks, and it is definitely I had to have a thing. I was like, Crybaby, because I really love Crybaby. But I think Hairspray is my favourite John Waters film. Also, Serial Mom was on that list. I'm like, that's very good too. But Hairspray edges it out for me. I think it's the one that put John Waters in my little film universe. And it definitely put him on my kind of radar. And I am one of those sycophantish kind of. I do think he's a great artist. Do I agree with everything he says? Not necessarily. Do I think all of his films are wonderful? Not necessarily. But do I think he is an important filmmaker and someone that everyone should at least watch one or two of his films and make a decision on their own? 100%, because I think there is merit in nearly everything he does. Maybe not Seed of Chucky. That's it. That's all we have to say. I guess that's it then. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Never Seen a Film Club, where we yelled at you, the members, because you picked this film that was on a list for you to vote for. Because it's not a bad film. It does not belong on the Z-List Best of the Worst. It's a really good film, and you should go and watch it! Anyway, thank you so much for watching us and joining us today. You can follow Accidental Theatre at Accidental T on most things, or Accidental Theatre. Just Google us. Do it the old-fashioned way. You'll find us on Instagram, Facebook, and a load of other stuff. And here. I don't know why I'm mad, but I am. But find us. And you can find Cinepunked and Robert at...
most places we are Cinepunked. On Instagram, we're Cinepunked Film. Or you can politely stalk me from a cyber distance, either under my own name or at Abelard.
Sweet. That's all we have to say. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.